Hey guys, it's Mike Urban. We're back with another episode. We're either on 9 or 10. We were just debating that recently. I'm starting to run out of numbers. But I'm sitting here with Ryan Fattman. He is a Republican state senator in Massachusetts. So Ryan, I'm happy to have you on today.
Mike, thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I was first introduced to you. So one of my subscribers sent me an email and they sent me your video. And I don't know if it was, I don't remember what network picked it up, but I saw you talking, and then I did commentary on that video and, gave my opinion. I'm like, wow, we really share a lot of the same values in terms of what's happening here with immigration in Massachusetts and upholding the law, everything that it entails, right? And I found it very impressive. You were very well spoken, to the point, and I hadn't seen somebody that was so well spoken on that issue, because I cover that issue quite frequently, and that's why I'm just happy you're here so we could kind of talk it through.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so you recently, the SHIELD Act, you want to talk about that and inform people what it is?
Yeah, so just by way of introduction too, for those of you who don't know me that tune into your show all the time, because I know you have a lot of people that listen to your program. So I'm Ryan Fattman. I represent 19 towns in the southern central part of Massachusetts, Worcester and Hampden County, 19 communities. I say it's a great honor to be a state senator. I've been serving since 2015, but the greatest honor of my life is being called husband and dad. And so everything that I do, when I look at a bill or an issue, I say, how does this affect my family? How does it affect my community? I'm blessed to have been born and raised in the town of Sutton, where I'm now raising my family. I married my high school sweetheart. And, we have this privilege of raising our family in a safe community. And yet, as we've looked around and watched state policy play out, it's come right to our own hometown. In August of 2023, there was 50 families that were sent, migrant families, from Logan Airport to the Red Roof Inn. And when you grow up in the town of Sutton, one of the things you know is you don't go to the Red Roof Inn because it's a place where a lot of nefarious activity happens. And so when I learned about this, it was a Monday morning. The town administrator had called me and said, I want to let you know 50 families were just sent to our Red Roof Inn, and no one from state government contacted us. Oh, and by the way, there are 3 babies there, and there's no diapers, there's no formula, there's nothing to support them. And we'd find out, Mike, that there wouldn't be anything sent for almost 2 weeks. And it was my hometown that stepped up through churches, through private people, and the municipal government. Municipal government put their lives on the line for their day jobs and went to the Red Roof Inn to try to support this program because it was the humane thing to do. Take the politics out of it. My hometown wanted to support people. And so when the thing started playing out and weeks would go by and we finally realized there was no resources coming, I started really wanting to communicate this to the Healy administration. Like, what are you guys doing? First of all, did you do a background check into the physical location where you're putting people? Because the police chief and the fire chief would tell you 2 things. One, that there's 137 pages of police activity from prostitution to sex offenders, level 3 sex offenders living in this hotel. And if you're trying to be humane, why are you putting families next to sex offenders? Makes no sense to any common sense, rational person. And I learned from the lieutenant governor, oh, no, there were no background checks done. When you're building a plane and trying to take off at the same time, sometimes you just rush things. And I'm like, wow, this is just an example of poor policy that now has played out both in the public safety realm, where people have been assaulted, raped, had horrible things happen to them, and it's cost us nearly $3 billion of taxpayer money that's not going into making Massachusetts a better place to live. So I find it highly offensive, and that's why I've been trying to talk as much as I possibly can to as broad of an audience as I possibly can, which I guess is how we got here, because it was Fox News and Newsmax that have just reached out and wanted to chat about what's going on in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because there's a lot of bad things, unfortunately, that are happening.
Yeah, it's really a shame, because it seems as though the Healy administration is adopting the ready, fire, aim methodology to these things. And I understand, some things are messy and whatever, but again, you bring about the humane side of this, the empathetical side of this, and there's really not much, it's really not humane to send people where what'd you say, 117 police reports at the hotel, right?
Yeah, 137
or 137.
pages.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Even worse. So like, you think you're doing a good thing on one hand, but on the other hand, it may not be so good. And it's really a shame. You brought up the $3 billion. I don't understand how we could continue down the same path. Moreover, I don't imagine this. Imagine the federal administration didn't change, and we were seeing upwards of 2.5 to 3 million people coming into the country for the next 4 years, for the next 8 years. What would our budget look like then?
Yeah.
Think about it. Would it be $6 billion? Would it be $10 billion? I mean, I always say this, like, charity starts at home. I'm okay with helping people and doing what needs to be done. But there's a point where you are, again, I say this a lot, robbing Peter to pay Paul here, right? You're taking resources away from the citizens paying into the system, and you're giving it to people that otherwise came here illegally. It just doesn't make any sense.
I think people also need to really nail down into what this is all about too, because the $3 billion that was used to support people coming here in the EA shelter program is basically money that people should consider lost money. Light it on fire. It's gone. The reason why I say that is this idea that the administration, both previously the Biden and now the Healy administration, is that we're going to welcome people in because, there's jobs that people need to fill, and we need to, have workers in our workforce that are not populating jobs in Massachusetts. Well, 95 to 99% of these immigrants that come through this parole in place program are rejected for asylum. Rejected. Mm-hmm. And when you are rejected, the law states you must go home and you can never come back. You can't be a green card holder here. You can't be a permanent citizen here. In fact, if you do try to come back, it's a felony to come back. Mm-hmm. And so you are prohibited from being in the United States of America. So take the $3 billion, multiply it by 99%, and you've basically lit that money on fire because it's not serving a useful purpose other than humanitarian aid to help some people. But there's a lot of people in this state that need help. Just to rattle off a few issues, my brother's in the Army National Guard. He was deployed from January of 2023 to February 2024. Since he's come back, 4 people have committed suicide from his regiment. Those are 4 people that fought for our freedoms and put their lives on the line who have no longer are living amongst us. We don't track suicide rates amongst Massachusetts National Guards men and women. Mm-hmm. We have $3 billion where we could have done that. You have 10,000 people across the state that their homes have what they call a crumbling foundation. Mm-hmm. Those crumbling foundations have a mineral called peritite in them, and they're falling apart, and their life's biggest investment is now worth zero. And the Connecticut, their state government 6-8 years ago solved this problem, created a fund. It's a $300 to $400 million problem. We just spent $3 billion on people who are never going to contribute to society. This is not an indictment on those people for the most part. These are not probably bad people for the most part. There's a lot of good people. Why wouldn't you want to be in the United States? This is the most amazing place in the world to live. And if people don't realize that, they should try living somewhere else. Mm-hmm. You go into another country like Russia, you're a basketball star, you have a little bit of marijuana, and you get locked up for the next year because they want to make a political statement. Oftentimes that stuff doesn't happen here. But this is about resources, and it's about putting money to work for the taxpayer workers who live here, raise families here, build businesses here. And I think it's why people are leaving our state. The only reason why we're afloat and not losing net population is because of the migration coming in for people who are not going to be legally able to contribute. And that's a real problem, in my opinion.
I would agree with you. And it extends beyond where money could be used for foundations. I mean, look at how many, I don't know if your town is, but how many towns are behind budget?
Absolutely.
It's insane.
Munson, I represent $1.4 billion budget deficit. Northbridge, the largest town in my district, has a $5 million override. The $3 billion, it's $3 million a day per year for 3 years. I mean, what could your community do with $3 million?
My community's behind our budget. My community's voted for 7 overrides. Every single one got turned down. None of the overrides passed. But then people don't realize what happens here. So there's money that taxpayers are paying into. It's not going back to the taxpayer. and it's going to people that are coming here illegally. Meanwhile, the schools, the hospitals, the resources, all of these things are struggling when the state originally had the money to help them to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's really shameful when you think about it, and it's a really an unfortunate circumstance, and that's why I think that your bill is paramount to at least curbing some of the. It's not going to it's going to curb some of the issues,
yes.
right?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. So, the ultimate insult to injury ends up becoming that, well, there's a bunch of good people who came through and they just want a better life for their family, and they're very expensive, that some of those people are bad people. They're evil people. They're rapists. They're assaulting and battering people that are innocent victims. And so the responsibility here falls directly on the Healy administration. I go back to my hometown of Sutton, 137 pages of police reports, not vetting the areas where you're putting people. Well, there was also a letter from the Healy administration warning the hotel that they were not in compliance with the state's 911 system. And they sent 3 letters and basically said, you can't even welcome people, let alone your staff. It's not a safe facility, yet they sent people there who are vulnerable. Yeah. So you look at the actual vetting of individuals, and a few months ago, the governor orders it. What have you been doing for the last 2.5 years? Why haven't you been looking at who's coming in? Isn't this just a competence issue on how you govern a state? You have the chief executive officer saying that they don't know who's come into our state, and it's been at least 150,000 people. And now you start seeing it play out on our streets where people in Brighton, someone was raped. They were apprehended by the police, brought to the courthouse, released with little to no bail. Mm-hmm. And if it was a one-off, you'd scratch your head and you'd say, okay, not right. This is ridiculous. It's not a one-off. It's common. It happened in Waltham. Just the other day in Worcester. This is something that's played out very interestingly. It's getting a lot of attention because of a city councilor there who went and made a political spectacle of it. But what the media has failed to grasp is the individual that ICE was going to detain failed to show up for a bail hearing in the Worcester District Court. So what were they failing to show up for? Assault and battery on a pregnant woman. Yeah. That pregnant woman happened to be her daughter. It is rumored that individual has been sex trafficking out her children. Now, it's a rumor, but it's from good sources, and the Worcester police and ICE are legally not able to talk about these things. And so it's incumbent upon the media to go pull the court records to try to get it out there, but that's not what happens at first. And so, these are people who ICE are going after. In 2017, there was a Supreme Judicial Court ruling that basically said local law enforcement and court officers, sheriffs are not able to work with ICE in responding to detainers. So my bill basically says, let's change it. Actually, as the SJC prescribed. They say in their ruling, there's no state law. So this guy, Lun, gets arrested for larceny somewhere around July 2016. And this case goes to court before the Supreme Judicial Court because there was an ICE detainer on him, and he was represented by taxpayer dollars. A court-appointed attorney that filed a motion that said, hey, you can't arrest this guy and, give him to ICE. He's got rights. And the SJC sided on his side. And essentially they said there's no statute. My bill creates the statute. And it does so limited in a way that I think most common sense people would agree with. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, whatever, however you identify politically, I think we all believe that someone who rapes a child should not be free in society. That if someone is coming to get them, there's a reason for it and they need to go. They need to serve their time and they need to be out of this country, never to return. Now, we don't want violent people, criminals in our Commonwealth. It's just not okay. What's the most ironic part about the Lun decision is 3 months after it's decided, outside of the court where it was decided, Lun assaults an elderly woman who's in a wheelchair and steals $2,000 from her in cash in her pocketbook. That's the response. That's the individual that won his freedom and rights because of a court-appointed, taxpayer-funded Massachusetts attorney. This is a messed up system, and we're not talking about going after people. You know, we've all seen it. You know, this Tufts student. I'm a Tufts graduate. As a Republican, I don't like government showing up and knocking on your door. I believe people are instilled with God-given rights. It does concern me when something like that plays out and people are in masks and seemingly the only crime was speaking out and using your voice. Now, maybe there's more to the story. You never know. But I think most people would say, I don't really like that. But the person beating up a pregnant woman, the person raping a child, get them the hell out of here. They have no rights to be in our state and to perpetrate these types of crimes. And the last thing I'll say about this before we go back and forth is this is also a failure of our court systems. The idea that the trial court has gotten in the way of ICE. Shelley Josephs is a district court judge who got indicted, and she was in Newton. And she basically took a guy who was trafficking fentanyl, of which I have kids and families that I represent who have died from overdose, and let him out the back door, violating policy both of the law and the trial court, where she shut off her recorder, which is illegal. You're not supposed to do that. And then we're outraged that she gets indicted for obstructing justice. You know, this is a priority problem, and I think the solution is the SHIELD Act, which, by the way, is also law in the state of California, because Massachusetts always loves to compare itself to California. Oh, what's California doing? Well, California has a law that's similar to this, and we need one here.
So, you know, you made a really good point. So, first of all, with the Lun decision, you know, what's crazy to me is that decision, if you think of it like dominoes, right? So once that chip fell, everything else fell down the line. And it's like, you know, a part of me, I'm not a politician, right? But a part of me is like, how does one court case get to completely shake the entire system of an entire state? Like, how could one single case shape the entire system? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's, you know, you have a one-off incident, and this has changed the trajectory of the entire state. Plus, you have, you know, obviously we're right to shelter. You have the Lun decision, and we obviously have sanctuary cities that are just popping up like, you know, like all over the place, it seems like, right? So, like, there's these three barriers. So, of course, when ICE comes here, this is my opinion, but it's like, without a uniform system, meaning, like, you know, you have ICE in this state, you have ICE in that state, like, these people, like, what gets enforced in Area A is not getting enforced in Area B, and I feel like must be a lot of confusion there, because what's happening is, as you said, like the Tufts student getting arrested, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you think that would have happened if the state was more in line with cooperating with ICE?
Probably not.
Probably not,
you know,
right?
Because our local police would use their discretion. And, you know, honestly, since 2020, there's been sort of this war on police officers. And yeah, it's like anything in society. There's bad police officers, there's bad journalists, there's bad politicians, you know, like just that's a rule. You know, and something we have to deal with. But this idea that they couldn't use their discretion and say, oh, you know, this is a traffic stop. This is, you know, someone jaywalking. There's no other criminal record. That's okay. You know, like, whatever. But, oh my gosh, I've looked them up, and they are wanted for terrorism, which is one of the things the bill points out. Like, we can't forget that when you and I were much younger, you know, back on September 11, 2001, that was launched from Logan Airport. You know, I think people look at soft targets. I get very nervous about the state of the public safety in our state, especially when the governor is saying, I'm not doing background checks on the hundreds of thousands of people you're bringing in. And another point I would make to people listening is that it's really unfortunate that your top law enforcement officer, Maura Healey at the time, during the Lun decision, applauded the decision. You know, didn't say, you know, I think we should change the law. I'm going to file a bill and make it a statute. And then has the audacity as the governor to say we're not a sanctuary state. Oh, there's nothing to see here. That's all politics. And she's being exposed for that. It's exposed on a public safety standpoint. It's exposed on a public financing standpoint, as we've discussed. And it's something that's just truly horrific. I think that, when you look at the egregious cases that have come through the trial court and you have judges that give little to no bail on dangerous people, it's shameful. And it's something that has to change.
Why do you think that is? Like, I actually was thinking about this on my drive up that I wanted to ask you. How do they determine the bail, like, for these people? Like, you know what I mean? If this was me or you, we would be screwed, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? But, like, these people are getting out on $500 bail.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I really just can't comprehend how they think they're on the right side of history with doing these things with violent criminals. It doesn't make sense.
And I think one of the points you just made, if it were me and you, we should be screwed.
Yeah.
Because if we were raping children, if we were doing something that was illegal, it doesn't matter your immigration status. It matters the crime. And that crime should have severe penalties. You've got children, I've got children. Can you imagine? I don't think I'd wait for law enforcement to get involved. I'd probably take the law into my own hands. Terrible to say, but that's the emotional response you would have.
Sure.
Why do people do this? Why does the judiciary act this way? To make a political point? They want to send a message to the president. Is that what happened in 2017? The president now is president back then. Is that what's going on? If that's what's going on, that's a real sad statement. We need to look at things more objectively and in common sense. Like, let me read you this. This is what ICE detainers are issued for. Convicted or charged with aggravated felony offenses of murder, rape, sexual abuse of a minor, illicit trafficking of a controlled substance, defined in federal statute as 8 U.S. Code 11101. Then another one is gang-related activity and offenses defined by 18 U.S. Code 521, or has been charged in terrorism offense, like I said before. I mean, this is not jaywalking. And so the idea that that's why the judiciary is making a point because these are innocent people is just absurd.
Yeah. The other portion of this is that a lot of people that are in the emergency shelter systems are, at least on the U.S. citizen side, it seems as though are not getting the same treatment that people that came here illegally are getting.
Oh, yeah.
And that's based on, I have a lot of people call me that watch the channel, right?
I have a woman in my district, her house burnt down 2 years ago. She had insurance covering her stay in a hotel and then another place. She's now out of insurance money, doesn't have her home rebuilt. She called us looking for shelter. Guess what she cannot find? She has 2 boys. I know another woman who's taking care of their mother who is homeless. Abusive situation. Kicked out of the house from another state, came to Massachusetts, looking for shelter, living out of her car, unbeknownst to the son. He finds her, can't find her shelter. And for me, this all started in May of 2023. I mentioned my brother. He was deployed in Iraq. I get a call, my sergeant's dad, Vietnam vet. He's living in a car in Boston. Do you think it can help? I said, yeah, absolutely. That's horrible. Remember, we said to our Vietnam vets, we would take care of you after the horrible way they came home. And we called. I personally started, my staff started calling. Then I personally started calling, and we found no vacancy everywhere. We're like, what is going on here? This was before the issue was ahead of the public consciousness, right? People were coming in. These laws existed on our books, and Massachusetts is the only state with the right to shelter law as a state. There's a bunch of municipalities across the country that do. New York in particular, the mayor there was saying, enough, we can't do this anymore. They were taking hundreds of thousands of people. And so the Biden administration started rerouting them to our state in Massachusetts, and it was very quiet. And then all of a sudden in August, there was a declaration of an emergency, which still exists today. And one of the reasons why so much money's been blown, because you don't have to go out and follow contracting laws in our state that, try to get the bid come down. The governor just gets to pick whoever she wants. And, if it happens to be a political contributor, whatever, let's do it. And they can raise their rates as high as they want. And it's one person in control of the whole program, which I find to be really unfortunate in that state of emergency, which still exists today. And, so I got up and filed an amendment and said, this is the law. It comes from 1983. Michael Dukakis was deinstitutionalizing our mental hospitals. He didn't want people to be walking on the streets, so they created this shelter program. And I think if you look specifically at the law, it said if you come for the sole purpose of benefit, you were ineligible, meaning you had to be a resident or someone who was invested in Massachusetts. In the 1990s, that law was changed and that residency requirement done away with. So this has become the debate. Can you require a residency requirement? A lot of Democrats on Beacon Hill say it's unconstitutional. You can't, put up barriers to people moving from state to state, whatever. And I would suggest that a residency requirement is essential for the success of our state. Because I don't really care if you're from South America or from South Dakota. If you're coming here just to take advantage of the people who have lived here, worked here, and done everything they can to make it a better state, you're taking advantage, and that's not right. That's what I'm seeking to change. I filed that amendment. We're going to be filing some amendments in a week. We have a budget coming up. The state budget, $61 billion document that has essentially doubled in 10 years.
Yep.
And these are some of the reasons why. You spend $3 billion on people that are not your residents. You can see why that's an inflated budget. And so we're hopefully going to try to bring back sanity and common sense to have residency requirements, and then to allow our police in our towns, on the state level, and in our courts to do their job, which they are sworn in to do.
I think that, we mentioned policing a little bit here. I think that it's probably, and I don't know if you're friends with any officers, they obviously call in sometimes, and correctional officers as well. And they are
unsung heroes, by the way.
Yes.
Those correction officers.
Oh, 100%. That the stuff that they have to deal with it's wild. But the fact is like a lot of these people it's probably extremely difficult for them to do their jobs, especially when they don't know. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, right?
Absolutely.
When they're they get an ICE detainer, like, what do we do? It makes it extremely difficult. And what happens is this is like a trickle effect too, because you could take a city like Boston. Look at Boston. The policing is down. They're supposed to be at anywhere from around 2,200 to 2,500 officers, and I think they're down to like 2,100 or something like that. So when you create this paradigm in this entire country that like policing is bad, we accept everybody, laws are optional, it just over the course of time, there could have short-term benefits for the people that are advocates of this, but it could have long-term consequences for everybody. Yep. That's my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's this thing that's crazy about Massachusetts. We put up this facade. Everyone's welcome. Like you just said, not everyone should be welcome. We don't want everybody. We want good people. We want hardworking people. We want people willing to roll up their sleeves and do what's right. We don't want everybody. Not everyone is willing to do that. If that's a lesson that people don't learn through the course of their life, they're probably not hanging out with enough people, because there are bad people in this world.
Yeah.
And we give police officers a badge and have them swear an oath with the idea that they will enforce our laws and make sure that society is upheld. To create this narrative that they're the bad guy and that everyone else, who's breaking the law is a good guy. It's just this utter confusion.
I don't know if you saw this, but you mentioned Worcester, which I covered that the other day too.
Yeah.
Leah Foley sent an email. Did you get to that email on my way here about what happened? She didn't. I don't think she specifically quoted Worcester,
yep.
But she's like, if anybody is, in the position, whether you're public or political, and you get in the way of obstructing ICE, there's going to be damage to be had.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's obstruction of justice. I mean, they just had in, I believe, Wisconsin or Michigan, a judge try to help out a migrant that was wanted by ICE. And that person was indicted by a federal court. And that is the way to go. When you obstruct the carrying out of justice, that's obstruction. That is a felony. That is wrong. You don't do it. And you have to send a strong message. What happened to all the adults in this country? What has happened to a generation of adults? That is a really concerning thing as an American, to look at society and say, what is going on? Common sense should rule the day. And I see things with my own eyes, and none of it makes sense. And I think that that's why people have really started, I know you have so many followers. When you speak common sense, people want to hear it, because they're also afraid to put their own necks out there.
100%.
They don't want to be castigated by their friends. They want to have community. I think one of the things 2020 and COVID taught us is, we need people and human interaction. We have to have a vibrant community. But when people are destroying each other on Facebook and on Twitter and, taking away the humanity, the one-on-one conversation or the multiple people at a table, it doesn't serve humanity or a community at all.
No, you're right about that. And one other thing that I wanted to mention to you was in terms of what you see happening at a legislative level, right? So obviously we want to do the best that we can to advocate for your bills and anything that you're trying to get done. But it's so difficult to do anything here. And you know who said this the best? Nate Friedman. I don't know if you saw his video on, did you see his video on the migrant shelters?
I don't think so.
Oh,
was he on the road? Was he going shelter to shelter?
So
I may have seen it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll send it to you. But he basically coined this phrase, and I absolutely love it. He said that Massachusetts prides itself. This is not verbatim, but he said Massachusetts prides itself on being diverse, just not diversity of ideas.
Yes.
And I was like, that sums it up, right? So leading into that, you face so much opposition as a Republican in this state. Right? Anything you want to try to do, of course you have your party backing you. I'm sure you have friends on both sides, but once it gets time to voting, your hands are tied, right? A lot of these people here, they just do not want to go against the status quo. And that's like you were just talking about, bringing some common sense to these people. I think this is a huge problem with society right now, especially here in Massachusetts, is a lot of people have the same ideas or think the same things that we think, but they're scared to share those opinions with their friends because they're scared they're going to be ostracized. Oh, yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And what that does is it creates this atmosphere where they're not necessarily living to their true values, right? Yeah. And they have to go and they have to watch you or listen to me or do all these other things in order to have an outlet or a community built so that they could share their side of the story or be able to think clearly or whatever it is. And I really feel like that holds a lot of people back here where it's the state is primarily blue. Of course, you have some counties that are not, but the reality is I feel like people are just scared to go against the status quo here, right?
I absolutely agree. I think it's this sad thing that's happened in our society that I like to term as moral imperialism, where basically I know better than you, so therefore I am better than you, and your opinion doesn't matter. And shut up. And that is a horrible approach. It's anti-democracy. It doesn't serve anyone well. I see it occasionally on Beacon Hill. And what's funny is it's not always a party line issue. Yeah. There's people up there that just act that way, and it's not the way they act. I feel very blessed. I was born into what I call a mixed marriage. My mom's a Democrat, my dad's a Republican. And so I got to see them at the dinner table, chatting away, debating different ideas. My mom had good ideas. My dad knew how to pay for them. That's how we kept the peace at the dinner table, But they loved each other. They disagreed, but, weren't disagreeable about it. Where has that gone in society? I think social media plays a huge part in it. I can just throw bombs without ever having to be accountable to anybody. And it's funny because in local elections, now that we've gotten away more from COVID and people are reintegrating, I've seen in local elections, people go on Facebook, be the keyboard warriors, and then they walk into a room and their friends and everybody just goes, they quiet down really quick because everyone's like, whoa, I don't know if I want to go talk to that person. What are they going to say about me? And maybe that's what eventually swings the pendulum back and self-corrects things. But in 2018, I decided I'm off of Facebook. Anything you see I post on, I don't have anything to do with it. It's trash. I honestly think social media is trash. We have to figure out a way to talk more to one another this way because moral imperialism, I know I'm not right on everything. I have some deep-seated beliefs. Other people can challenge those. They can push me to my limits, but I also have to be introspective. What am I wrong about? Am I thinking about this the wrong way? And, but I have values, and those values I think need to be respected. And that's how we build mutual community, mutual respect.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. That's why sometimes even in my videos, I'm talking and I'll just second guess myself. And I think and I say am I the crazy one here?
Right.
Am I wrong? Am I crazy? Because if I am wrong on something, I'm number one, I'm the first person to admit that I'm wrong, because we all make mistakes and whatever. But the problem is that if somebody has one idea and another person has another idea, they can't even talk about those ideas.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, because you can't come up with a realistic solution between one side or the other side. And you know what? Diana put this very eloquently. You know, she said something along the lines of like, everything is a distraction, and they are, and again, I'm not trying to quote her verbatim here, but she basically was trying to say that like, a lot of this is distraction so that the left and the right don't communicate as much.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I don't know if that's true or not. You know, you would know better than me. I'm not a politician. But like, if you can't have people come together and have this like uniform good ideas or good policy or good legislature, whatever it may be, then what the hell are we doing? It's no longer a democracy.
And I know you had Diana, our state auditor, on. I'm a big fan. I've known Diana for a long time, and I was very pleased that she put the audit of the legislature on the ballot and worked her butt off for it, and has been successful to the point of getting 72% of the people across the Commonwealth to vote for it. Mm-hmm. Show me an issue 72% of the people agree on these days. And what I find ironic, and we were talking about this before we came on the show, is that the last election cycle, going back to this moral imperialism, is democracy's on the ballot. Democracy's on the ballot. The republic will end if certain people win the election. And the same people making that argument then looked at the ballot initiative to audit the legislature that 72% of the people voted for and said, oh, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to implement direct democracy. And to this day, 5 months into the legislative session, they haven't implemented the will of the people. And I said this before about immigration. If it was a one-off, you'd say, okay, well, you know, whatever. But people voted to reduce their income taxes a long time ago, before you and I were eligible to vote, probably, and they wanted to move it down to 5%. It took 20 years for the legislature to implement that. They also, in that ballot initiative, said, let's bring charitable deductions so that when people, you know, give money to a charitable cause, you can write it off on your income taxes. That got delayed until 20 years. And actually, it got implemented last year in a tax relief bill, and now the governor is trying to change it again and cap it, even though that 20 years ago, the voters voted on it. You know, clean elections, charitable deductions, term limits was something that people voted on. Like, and the legislature injected itself and bang, you know, slapped it away. And so you really start to question, well, what's going on Beacon Hill? Because if 72% of the people are voting on something, shouldn't it be implemented? I think we have to take a second crack at this and make it a constitutional amendment. I've shared that with Diana. I think you offer it as a constitutional amendment, and therefore it requires a longer process, but it gives her the constitutional authority to do it, and no one can challenge that in court. That's
actually what I think. Didn't I? I think I told her that.
Yeah.
Like, why hasn't somebody tried to make this a constitutional amendment so that it cannot be? I swear I may have. I'll have to go back and rewatch the video. I mean, that would really be the only way to circumvent this issue that she has, right? Or one of the only ways.
And I also think, like, when you look at the issues we're talking about here today, $3 billion spent on non-residents, heinous crimes played out without consequence, and actually walls and barriers put up to help the people committing crimes, you start to understand why Democrats, Republicans, and independents said, yeah, let's audit the legislature, because they're the ones making these laws, or not making the laws to fix the laws that are broken. And we need more accountability. Yeah. And that's what Diana ran on. And I support her. I wish you know, she would think about running for other things and making a little bit more of a splash. But you know, she's got to do what's right for her. And this is her fight. And she's got some allies, and I'm certainly one of them.
One question that I have for you, too, is in terms of the emergency shelter system, how does it cost $3,000 per week per family? How is that humanly possible?
Yeah, you know, when I look at my family budget and I consider that, it really makes me sick, because I don't live off that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, where is that money going?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Like, I understand there may be.
By the way, the reason why you know that was my amendment. I filed that as an amendment to the supplemental budget. And I did that because I wanted to put it in human understandable terms. When you're talking about 3 billion, people don't understand what 3 billion is. A million seconds is 12 days. You and I understand 12 days. A billion seconds, I believe, is 33 years. 33 years, that's most of our life. That starts thinking bigger. Mm-hmm. A trillion is 33,000 years. in seconds. So like you start talking about billions of dollars, I'm not sure people truly understand the magnitude of what a billion is. But when you start saying almost $2,900 a week, if I gave you $2,900 a week, what would you do with it? People would be like, oh my gosh, I could pay my mortgage. I'd be done paying my mortgage in 3 years. I could pay my mortgage every week. It's like, I think that people need to understand. And that's why I filed the amendment. I voted against the bill, but I was happy to get that in there because I just wanted people to really understand in, family terms, what does this actually mean?
But where's the money going? I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. How is it costing that amount of money? Can't somebody, like, I don't think Diana can, but can't somebody audit that money? Like, shouldn't somebody audit this money?
Yeah, she should. And it needs to be. And the problem is there's an emergency under state law that the governor's declared. And funny enough, back in 2020, I had filed, I liked Charlie Baker. I thought he was a good governor. I certainly didn't agree with him on everything. There was certain things during COVID that played out that I vehemently disagreed with. But buyer's remorse here. Hey, he was a lot better than what we got now. And what I would suggest is, when I saw certain things playing out, I thought that there needed to be more of a checks and balance on the executive. I filed a bill that would say you can declare an emergency, but after 60 days of said emergency, you have to come back to the legislature and ask for that to be reinitiated. You can't have a blank check. You can't have an endless clock. It just can't keep going until one individual says, oh no, I decide. No, we have 200 elected officials on the state level that should decide. And this is what should be happening with our governor. Mm-hmm. We should be saying, hey, governor, you don't get a blank check. Hey, governor, you don't get a clock that doesn't expire. You have to come back and we have to reauthorize. And we have made some progress in that, but not clearly enough. And yeah, when you're talking about this type of money, where's it going? So just an anecdote. When I found out about the Red Roof Inn in my hometown, the first thing I did was try to book a hotel room because I know it's about $150 a night to stay there. And immediately when I went on Expedia, it was $300 a night. There's your example. When government gets its hands in things and there's no accountability whatsoever, costs go up tremendously. So food service costs that got contracted with no bids, those go up because everyone knows it's guaranteed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The taxpayers of the state are funding it. It's unlimited resources, and we're willing to do it ad nauseum until whatever, we're still doing it. So that's why people are trying to get money and they're feeding themselves. And it's like kind of like government meets business in the worst marriage ever. And there needs to be a divorce.
That's you put that very well. I remember, again, quoting Nate Freeman's video, the people were making like, even just people that were sitting outside of the, let's say hotels are making like $150 an hour. You know what I mean? And they're just like, you know what I mean? Like they're just there in case. I mean, that's more than some police officers make. I mean, I think Cambridge PD makes like $100 an hour, whatever it is. But yeah, it really leaves a bad taste in my mouth because now, as you know, by the end of the year, they're going to start implementing background checks or something like that. It's like too little too late. But now they're transitioning people from the emergency shelter system into to home base. Yep. Right? You're familiar with this, right?
Yes.
I've covered this.
Exactly. This is a shell game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what's happening is there's still people entering the emergency shelter system as fast as they're exiting. At least that's the way it looks to me. Yeah. So what I mean by that is if we have a cap of 7,500 people that were originally in the shelter system, and that number starts to trickle down, but now all of a sudden you have, let's say, U.S. citizens or veterans or people that were homeless that were here prior, now they're re-entering into the system, which I know that they are because one of the bills or something like that I was looking at, it had a statistical breakdown of how many people in the last week tried to enter. It was like 450. Yep. 450 for 1 week is a lot of people, or 2 weeks, whatever it was. But then the people that were there are now going through this home-based program. And obviously, I've talked to people that work for these programs, right? And I kind of got the inside scoop on this. But it seems like we're only repeating a problem by and I'm not saying people shouldn't seek emergency shelter. That's not the case at all. I'm just saying that it seems as though we're going to have 7,500 plus people that are getting now subsidized rent Meanwhile, we're going to have another 7,500 people entering the emergency shelter system at $3,000 a week. How is that? I'm not a rocket scientist, but I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to say, how the hell is that sustainable?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. Let me ask you this. Do you know if more people are coming here? Are they flying more people in here?
It's hard to determine that. So we do know that the numbers have slightly trickled down. The governor was sort of taking a victory lap on this a few months ago because numbers coming into the state had slowed down, but it also suggests the border was completely closed. So this whole program slowed down across the entire country. The second thing is your point about home base is 100% correct. And I've been talking about this as well. You know, this is just a shifting of resources now. We're saying, okay, let's get it out of the EA shelter program and let's put it into permanent residency. And people who will never be permanent, by the way, like I said before, 99% of these individuals will have their applications through federal immigration court rejected, which means they can never come back. They then have to be deported. The problem is it usually takes 5 to 9 years to get to that process based on what we're experiencing, and then people don't show up. And yet they're still not here legally. So an employer trying to hire them, it's illegal. If they have some sort of credential or work authorization, that's not legal. And yeah, now we're using taxpayer-funded resources to pay rent in permanent housing. By the way, what's the number one scarcity in this state? Housing. So what does that do? It drives up rents for everybody, and it drives up housing costs for everybody. And when you consider the fact that somebody who knows that an individual is going to be paid for by the government for years to come, when someone has an opening in their rental unit, Joe Schmo no longer gets that unit. It's migrant family, because I know the government's going to pay me, but the renter, the tenant, they may miss their rent. They may come on hard economic times. So let's go where the money is.
100%. I just want to
full circle.
Yes.
Massive problem.
It's a huge problem. And then what's happening is, so in Massachusetts, and I obviously covered this in a video. Maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't. Massachusetts, you could only collect first month's, last month's, and security deposit. But you know what they're doing with this home base program is they are, because it's not coming directly from the tenant, they're able to offer an incentive to the landlord to accept the application A over application B.
Yep.
So they collect an extra month's worth of rent up front.
Yep.
So now they're getting, let's say, 4 months worth of rent instead of what, let's say, somebody that's, you know, just a regular tenant, they're not through these programs, they could only provide so much. And then they have the financial security that this is government-backed money, right?
Yep.
So, of course, like, this all heads down the path of a fair housing violation, in my opinion, right?
Yeah,
On
it's a
top
great
of that,
point.
yes, and on top of that, Liz Miranda tried to increase the amount of money that was going to home base.
Yeah.
It was going to go from $45,000 to $75,000. I think that got voted down, if I'm not mistaken.
It did, yes.
It did. But how long until it gets brought back up on the table, right?
And that's the thing. People start looking at the crazy that gets proposed and go, oh, that's never going to happen. And then you see it a few years come down the road and it's like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Never going to happen? How did it happen? It happens through elections. And so for all your viewers, the biggest thing I would encourage them to do is know who your representatives and senators are. Because people think, oh, like all this stuff about the federal noise and the elections there. Your local elections and your state elections have so much more consequence on your life than the federal government is ever going to have. You know, unless we go to a war and there's massive conflict, every day soup and nuts government responsibilities happen on the local and state level. And we're just squandering people's resources that they work hard for.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you one, because you have to get off soon, I think, right? But I'm going to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
If you feel like answering it. So I had Jeff Cohen on here. He's the he runs the, I can't remember the election integrity for fair elections, right? And they were going to, you know, they were basically auditing election data and stuff like that. And we were talking a little bit about when these illegal immigrants come here and now they're getting driver's licenses.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you get your driver's license, you have an opportunity to check whether your political affiliation is.
Yes.
Would that in turn...
Automatic voter registration.
Automatic voter registration.
Yep.
Is that not an issue?
It's certainly an issue. And when you want to compound the issue, look at the elections committee. The elections committee just had a hearing, and it was about allowing non-residents to vote in municipal elections. That's a priority that should just be defeated every day of the week. Citizenship needs to be meaningful. You can't cheapen it. And that's what I think, if I were to make a criticism of the American left, they cheapen citizenship. Maybe they don't like the country, maybe they don't think it's good, whatever, but don't cheapen it, because people have died for it. People in my family have gone through World War II. I'm sure people in this town and all the towns around us have lost loved ones. And that's something we need to respect. And when we start talking about, people who are not our citizens coming into our state, getting an abundance of resources, and then you're going to make them voters too, that is just outrageous.
It is. I didn't do a dedicated video on this, but I basically I called it the incentive framework, right? So if you have people coming into the country and all of a sudden they're getting health care, they're getting shelter, they're getting food, whatever it may be, they're being incentivized to, in my opinion, if they have the eligibility to vote, who in God's name is going to vote against for these subsidized incentives that the taxpayers are paying for? They're going to vote for whatever party is allowing this to happen. I mean, it's common sense, right? I mean, this is one for one, absolute common sense. So the more you incentivize a group of people, of course, that is a pretty darn good strategy, some meta-level strategy here to retain your votes, right? Let's just call it what it is. I'm not claiming that's what's going on, but I know if it were me and it were my family, if I went over to Italy or wherever and I was getting all of these things from the people that were paying taxes, whatever they do over there, of course I'm going to vote for the people that allow me to be there and live for free. Meanwhile, I'm working for whatever, getting money under the table and still getting the free apartment, because that's what's happening. That's why you see people driving around with BMWs and Mercedes-Benz. You're like, how the hell? Go look at the parking lots.
Yep. And we provided cash benefits to these individuals through a separate welfare program.
Like stipends?
So an EBT card.
Yeah.
Where people could go get cash. So the feds give us money for SNAP benefits. And it's very specific that SNAP benefits can only be for citizens or permanent residents. And what we did in December of 2023, I believe, is we created another SNAP program, the state SNAP program, and we put $6 million into it. And in 3.5 months, the money was gone. The program was bankrupt. And we gave these cards to migrant families, and it allowed them to go into an ATM and withdraw cash. $6 million of taxpayer money withdrawn with cash. That's horrific.
Where did that $6 million come from?
This legislature appropriated it.
Okay, but
it's like the $5 million that the House just approved to basically defend people in court that are in jeopardy of being deported.
Right.
This is insanity.
It's full circle insanity.
It's full circle insanity. And another thing, if you're listening to this right now, and you don't believe that this entire migrant issue, the right to shelter, the sanctuary policies is about political power, you're very naive. And I'll explain. The Constitution, every 10 years, requires us to do two things. Reapportion population by the states, and then redistrict. And we have a principle: one person, one vote. But person is the key word, not citizen. The Constitution does not refer to citizenship when it comes to reapportionment. It says people. And that goes back to the founding documents of this country, the 3/5 compromise, which is not a good compromise, by any standard, with slavery. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to apportion based on population, not citizenship. And so one thing that has happened in Massachusetts, our legal residents have left our state, and it has happened for a decade. And the way you offset that is by bringing people in. And why would you want to offset it? So you don't lose a congressional seat. And when you lose a congressional seat, you lose federal power in Congress, and your state diminishes in its political footprint. That is what's going on here, in my opinion, because there's going to be a census committee hearing in the Senate that I'm a part of, and I believe there's going to be a lot of talk about, well, we have to make sure everyone's counted. And if you know that you're setting up programs, home base, for the next 5 years, which, by the way, reapportionment happens in 2030 and starts probably in late 2029, you start to see that there is a little bit more to the story than just humanitarian aid. let's help people. No, there's political power at stake. And where are people moving? They're moving to places like Idaho and Florida and Texas, not California, not New York, not Massachusetts, not states that are highly regulated, highly taxed, and low in freedom. People vote with their feet. But if you are told there's a better life for you from another part of the world in Massachusetts because of all the good things that the people of Massachusetts are willing to do for you, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
And that's how we have a major political problem long term, because I think that this is totally about the census. I believe it's about congressional districts and making sure Massachusetts doesn't lose electoral votes and congressional members.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it doesn't, when you try to boil it down, it really doesn't make much sense. Logically, fiscally, right? You could tie in all these elements. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, we're almost at an hour. So this has been awesome. I'm actually this is gonna be one that I go back and rewatch, and I appreciate you coming on.
Mike, I really appreciate you covering the subject matter. Keep speaking truth to power, and if you ever need me again, I'll be happy to be here.
I appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you.